Hi, I'm Dr. Carol Francis, and we're now on to our next set of R's. I'm going to put these two together. One is reject, and the other one is replace. And the reason these two have to go together is because anytime you're rejecting an experience or a memory or an emotion, you need to put something else in it. When I help individuals stop smoking, for example, we put something else in there so that the space of time, the 7 minutes when they're used to smoking, actually has another set of purposes in it. So if you're going to reject something, you want to replace it. And that is something that works really well in the brain. When you reject something and you leave the space empty, there's a gravity over to this again. So you want to recognize it's like you look for what's missing because you sense the missing. So instead of missing it, you reject it, get rid of it, put something else in there, and that becomes the new focus. So that space is occupied. It's an interesting combination. So I needed to put both of those R together. I guess we could say this is the 13 R's if I'm going to put those together, but there we are. So one of the things you're going to find is that you're going to do some self-rejecting type talking to yourself. It's a marvel to me that people who are abused actually further abuse themselves. And I say it's a marvel, but I've lived through it. So it's a marvel that I did it as well. So I'm not judging it as much as like, why would we do that? Why would we reject ourselves, harm ourselves, re-abuse ourselves when someone else has already done more than enough of that? Why would we engage in it? In part, it's because we've been trained to do it. Remember on the previous R, it's like whatever we practice and repeat is what we are trained into doing. It's what we're used to, familiar with. It is what we know. It's what our body responds to. Our chemistry will kind of look for it, lurch for it. And so we have to realize when we're doing it to ourselves. We also have to realize that when those individuals come back in our lives. And I just want to suggest that I'm going to dedicate a program to forgiveness. It's a very important quality of recovery. It's also very dangerous, and I will talk more about this later, that your abusers who are manipulators, and so I'm not talking to all of you right now, but your abusers who are manipulators will want to come back. They too are programmed to want to come back. You've been something that's been part of their lives to the degree that they wish they had never done it, that they sincerely are regretful. Okay, but chances are they're just going to repeat it. And what's interesting is when they come back and you let them in out of maybe a wrongful application of the word forgive, you are actually just letting them come back and re-traumatize you. The trauma is usually worse. The abuse is usually worse. And the reason it's worse is because they got away with it that time, and you've set no boundaries, so they're just going to keep pushing until they get to the next boundary, or the next spot, or the next no, or the next absolute horrible thing that they can do. And there's also a way in which being an abuser, or being abusive, can actually be addictive. So if that addictiveness is related to their amygdala triggering the anger, and they're kind of addicted to the response of anger, you have to realize that they have things going on for them too that are all about the brain and repetition as well. And we're not discussing much of that, if any of it. But you have to know that they're into this repetition as well. So if you buy into being a part of it, then you have allowed that to come back into your life. And that is, in a sense, you also being abusive to yourself. I mean, it's a harsh thing to say, but that's what happens. And so self-cutting also is a part of being self-abusive. Trying to commit suicide is self-abusive. Anorexia and bulimia can be very self-abusive as well. There's so many things that we can do. Exercising to the point of absolute murderous pain, it can be abusive. Criticizing yourself is abusive. Being judgmental, rejecting yourself, hating yourself, feeling like you're the worst trash in the world, all these things that you say over and over to yourself, as in the previous discussion about repetition, you are actually repeating the experience of this harsh and horrible stuff, and you're actually regrooming that inside yourself. You're rewiring that. You're making that a stronger connection every time you're cruel to yourself. So this process of rejecting And replacing is extremely important in these circumstances. So if you reject a person, if you say no, if you reject a pattern, if you reject, I don't want to be mean to myself anymore. I don't want to cut myself anymore. I don't want to say mean things to myself. I don't want to be critical to anymore. I don't want to be feeling this irrational guilt anymore. I want to live really, really true and good to myself. So I need to reject that. So the very first act, when you catch yourself resubmitting to cruelty in yourself, uh, whether it's survivor's guilt or whatever it is, when you resubmit yourself to the trauma and you resubmit yourself to the abuse and you reenact it on a small level or on a larger level, you have another relationship that's abusive, you repeat that part, the first thing you want to do is to get to the point you say, you know what, I reject that, I get that away from me. And that in of itself is a first act. Your ability to know, this is a moment to reject how mean I'm being, to reject this abusiveness. And so that's the first act, reject. And then you need to replace. And the things that you can replace it with, as I was talking about in the previous video, is the anchoring of really wonderful feelings. This is a good time for you to go through the process of reinstilling and replacing it with these experiences. Also, this is a good time for you to reframe something. I'm going to reframe this particular food to be my comfort and my gift to me. So every time I reject it, I'm going to give myself a reward. And I know people say don't use food as a reward, but it is a reward. Choose a healthy food that would be ideal, right? So I am going to use ice cream in this moment. However, both dentists say that that's not as harmful for your teeth. It is loads of fat and sugar. I get that. However, a lot of people will take ice cream as a way of replacing anger and self-destructiveness. So take some really great yogurt, freeze it with some fruit, uh, put some really healthy sweetener in there, and then you can start taking that delicious experience of coolness that cools people down. Another thing that people will do is they'll take something hot, and our hot cups of coffee with cream is very, very much of a replacement. You can I'm gonna go have some coffee, or better yet, green tea. That's much better, right? Chai tea. It's like you can replace the moment. I just rejected them. I'm going to replace this with a food. And the reason I'm saying that you replace it with something is that's food, is that you're soothing your body. You're having this experience of feeling it. Now, I do understand there's eating disorders, and I do understand there's overindulgence and there's binging, and those, by golly, serve the same purpose as what I'm talking about. They're trying to fill up something that has an emptiness in it. The whole issue of binge eating and bulimia and all that is one I cannot touch here on this particular program or this class. But be aware that if that is your way of soothing yourself, you will need to reject that way of soothing it and replace it with something that's loving. Because what eventually happens with the overeating and the binging is that you begin to feel awful, just horrible. You can't breathe, you can't move, you hate the way you look, you're disgusted with yourself, and the food just makes you feel awful. So eventually you get to this point where you're abused by the fact that you did that, as opposed to shifting into trying to fill this fullness. So I would really recommend, if that's one of the ways you're manifesting, trying to recover from your abuse. I get it, I understand it, no judgment, but you do want to work through that, because that is yet again another form of self-abuse. So you want to reject, that's what I would do right now, and substitute something that's wholesome and healthy for you. And that process, what do I select? What do I replace it with? Maybe take a little bit of experimentation on your part. Do I replace it with a phone call to someone? Do I replace it with exercise? Do I replace it with a funny TV show? Do I replace it with singing a song? Do I replace it with dancing for joy? What do I replace this thing that I just rejected? And so now, in the very contemplation of what do I replace it with, you are now rehearsing, reframing it. I want to give myself something good. I want to fill this space of rejection and cruelty with something valuable and worthwhile, because I matter. I'm important. And just that, even that thought, even that contemplating that, as you can see, is replacing the rejection and the cruelty that you were exercising before. Okay, Be sure to do your knowledge gain on this and also your self-reflection, as with all of them, and also the meditations of moving toward understanding that replacement experience for you. Okay, I'll go on to the next star, but you have some other things you get to do first. Bye.